Well, welcome everyone to Temple Aaron's monthly Shabbat schmooze together. It's good to see everyone. And here we are. One can only imagine what any one of us have been through in the past week. And our being together, as is always the case at Temple Aaron, creates a special space. It's a spiritual space. It's a space filled with Yiddishkeit. And it's just a chance for us to leave the rest of the world aside just for a little while and celebrate the people we love and our friendship and what we share together through Temple Aaron, and just try to focus on the attitude of gratitude. And that attitude of gratitude, more and more, the longer I live, feels like really the most important attitude of all. Because once we really live inside that space of gratitude, God, I sound so modern in the way I'm talking, spaces and thing. But when we live in that universe of gratitude, it really helps us just address and deal with everything that comes our way. So Shabbat was really set aside, I think, if you believe the Bible literally, by God, where God says, and God rested from the work of creation to appreciate the work of creation. And to me, Shabbat is very much about entering the mindset of appreciation for the things that really matter in all of our lives. So before you light candles, you might take a moment, just consider the things that you really appreciate the most of all, the things for which you're most grateful. So yes, I gather it has been a challenging week for some of us. That's been expressed. And the beauty of Shabbat, it's interesting, Shabbat tradition says that when Shabbat begins, in a few moments we'll light the candles, and we will inaugurate Shabbat on our terms, because it's not sunset everywhere yet. So we'll bridge the span of time zones and we'll inaugurate Shabbat. But it says on Shabbat, to illustrate that we have an enhanced awareness of gratitude, it says we gain an extra soul on Shabbat. An extra dimension of soul enters us during these 25 hours. And it's not 24 hours, it's 24 hours plus 1 hour, because we don't want Shabbat to end in a rush. We like Shabbat to linger. So tradition says at least 25 hours. And technically you look up in the sky and look for 3 stars tomorrow night, and Shabbat technically comes to an end. And that usually is about an hour after sunset. So it's good to see everyone. And maybe it's good to take a deep breath, after this long week. Oh, goodness gracious. And just be thankful that we can pause. And, it's also worth remembering that in that very same section of the Torah, where it talks about how God appreciated creation at the end of 6 days, the last line, and it's included in the complete traditional Kiddush, it said, Shavat vayinafash, and God rested and was refreshed. So the rested part, Shavat, is related to Shabbat, which means a cessation of work. So God rested from the work, the toil, the focus, the concentration, the ambition, the productivity, all those things we associate with our lives in week to week, day to day, and the weekdays of our lives. And it says, so God rested, Shavat, vayinafash, to me is one of the most fascinating words in all of Jewish tradition, because vayinafash, we translate it as God was refreshed. God didn't just rest. God was refreshed. But how was God refreshed? Now, listen carefully. Vayinafash comes from the word nefesh. Vayinafash, nefesh. And the word nefesh means soul. So God rested from the toil and the work and the focus and the concentration and the ambition and the creativity and all the effort. And most importantly, vayinafash, and refreshed God's soul. It's an amazing idea. God is the ultimate spiritual containment, if you will, and even God refreshed God's soul. And all the more so when we're created in God's image. Vayinafash, we're commanded to do the same thing, to cease the work and the toil, but also that's not enough. Vayinafash, and to refresh our souls. And in the world we live in today, and I know for a fact there are no Orthodox Jews among us, because if there were, they wouldn't be here. So, because they wouldn't be here before Shabbat, and they wouldn't probably join in this activity. And that's no commentary on Orthodoxy. But for those of us who are here, we blend our Jewish intentions and our experience with the real world. We're real world Jewish souls trying to figure out the balance between the secular and the religious, the fundamentalist and the metaphorical. And so our being here means we care to refresh our souls. And that can mean something very different for every one of us. I'll tell you a story. When I was in Greenwich, Connecticut, I was a rabbi there for 13 years. And I was very close with this gentleman, lovely, beautiful family. And he used to call me on the phone on Mondays, and he would apologize. He'd say, "I'm so sorry, Rabbi, I didn't come to shul Friday night or Saturday." He said, "They're just not the best days for me." And then he said, "Would you mind doing Shabbat on Wednesday?" He said, "If you would do Shabbat on Wednesday, I'd always be there." God bless him. And I said to him, I said, Jewish tradition speaks to this question. It actually does. And it says, you can have Shabbat any day of the week you want, as long as you do it consistently the same day of the week, going forward into the future of your life. So I said to him, look, if you want to observe Shabbat on Wednesdays, just do it on Wednesdays. That's kosher. He said, "But you don't have services on Wednesdays." I said, well, I don't know. You could bring it to the board. We could change services to Wednesdays. He said, "But I'm not sure what they would say." But there was a profound lesson in that the need for refreshment, vayinafash, to refresh our souls. In truth, although our cycle of time has it every Friday night to Saturday night, it doesn't mean it can't happen any other time of the week. And the idea of including, the idea of including in your life activities that refresh your soul, whatever day of the week it takes place, is probably a good thing. So here we are it's not Wednesday night Shabbat, but it is Friday night Shabbat. And here we are, and I'm so glad you're all here. So here are our candles. So I'm going to give you a test, because rabbis always want to know if people are listening when the rabbi speaks, and there's an old joke. The old joke is the rabbi was in the receiving line
Yeah.
at the end of services, and people were walking out of the synagogue, and rabbi was shaking everybody's hands and giving hugs. And someone came through the line and said, you know, Rabbi, I could have sworn you gave that sermon last week. And the rabbi said, you're right, I gave it again because last week you weren't listening. So this is a test. And we've talked about it many times. Let's see if you've been listening. What is the reason we light 2 candles?
Because the 10 commandments in Exodus and Deuteronomy are a little different. Observe and remember.
The Sabbath day and keep it holy. I knew you would know the answer, Charles.
I was listening.
You're a star student. You were
I was listening.
You were listening. That's exactly right. 2 versions of the 10 commandments and 2 Shabbat commandments. One says observe and one says remember. So here's the tougher question. Which version of the 10 commandments says which one in which book? So it says remember in Exodus in the first version, and it says observe in Deuteronomy in the second version of the 10 commandments. So there we are. So if you have your candles, gather your candles. We'll light them together. Now, because technically Shabbat has already started and we can't light candles, we're going to close our eyes and then open them and look at the candles and go, oh my God, they lit themselves. So we haven't broken Shabbat by lighting them. And now we say the bracha, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Shabbat
Amen.
shalom, everybody. Wish one another a good Shabbat and
Shabbat shalom.
enter the sacred time. And now we have the Kiddush. The word Kiddush is related to the word Kaddish, is related to the word Kedusha, is related to the word Kodesh, all having to do with holiness, which in Judaism means being different, setting something apart for a special purpose. And the idea of holiness in Judaism is that the Jewish people are set apart to set an example for the nations of the world about what it means to be in a partnership, a covenant with the Almighty. So if you take your Kiddush cup together, fill with sweet wine for a sweet time of Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. L'chaim, everybody.
Chaim.
And we should also say la briut, which means to good health. And to good health.
Yes.
So this week, in the cycle of the reading of the Torah, we have a special Shabbat. And there are many special Shabbatot that are defined as special because of either where they fall in the Jewish calendar or because the Torah reading identifies something special. And this week's special Shabbat is called Shabbat Para. Shabbat Para. And other examples of special Shabbatot or Shabbat Hagadol, the great Sabbath, occurs right before Passover. And at our Torah class, next week, we're going to really take a look in some depth at the meaning of Pesach and the history of Pesach. So the Shabbat that occurs between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because there always is a Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, special Shabbat called Shabbat Shuvah, Sabbath of repentance. And then there are a series of Shabbatot that occur before Tisha B'Av, which of course is the national historic day of Jewish mourning. And we have an example of Shabbat Chazon, which is a rendition of sadness. And then, we have Shabbatot that celebrate comfort as well. So there are special Sabbaths that occur throughout the year. And this Shabbat is Shabbat Parah. And it's interesting, it occurs not long before Pesach, but after Purim. And the reason it's called Shabbat Parah is it's the Shabbat where we read about one of the most non-rational sections of Torah that talks about the red heifer.
Okay, so.
So the red heifer, how many of you have heard of the red heifer? All right, this is good. The red heifer was considered to be a cow, a heifer, that had not a single white hair on it, or single black hair on it, or even single gray hair on it. And it is discussed at length in the book of Leviticus this week. And the red heifer is singled out for a very special purpose, and it is completely non-rational. There are commandments in the Torah that make sense. We call them reasonable, rational commandments. And there are some commandments that are completely non-rational, and they are not explained. By the way, the commandments related to kashrut and the dietary laws are actually considered non-rational. They are not explained. It's not explained why meat has to have a split hoof and chew the cud. Not explained. Or why fish have to have scales, for example. Not explained. Or why you can't eat certain creepy crawly things, or why you can't eat shellfish or seafood, or the so-called bottom feeders of the ocean. Not explained. We might be able to imply or suggest why, but these are considered in the category of unexplained, non-rational mitzvot, commandments, that are throughout the Torah that are supposed to be accepted on faith. And there's perhaps nothing more illustrative of that kind of commandment than Shabbat Parah and the story of the red heifer. And so before I tell you what it's about in some detail, you wonder, why do they have this come up every year right before Pesach? And let's face it, Pesach is very ritualistic. In fact, I got to tell you something. I did not grow up in a kosher house, except on Pesach, everybody got kosher. Like, we had no kosher in my immediate household. But on Pesach, they took out special dishes. They put away all the chametz. You had to eat kosher food. The rest of the year, we'd go out as a family and eat Chinese food out of the house. My great-grandfather, of course, wouldn't bring it in his house, but he was the one and he was a very Orthodox type Jew, but he was a first-generation American Jew, and he kept kosher at home, but he had no problem going out with the family on Sunday nights, and we'd go out and have Chinese food, and then we'd go back to his home, and we'd watch Ed Sullivan. And this was like an American Jewish ritual. But when Pesach would come around, oy gewalt, everyone all of a sudden became so Jewish and so traditional. And they had separate sets of dishes hidden away somewhere in the house when they had no kosher, nothing. 11 other months of the year, in anticipation of Pesach, everybody got so very kosher. I even remember my great-grandfather, I was 5 years old, took me down to Haymarket Square in Boston, where I grew up. He lived in Jamaica Plain. This was his favorite thing in his life, to take me as his great-grandson to Haymarket Square on the day before Pesach. And he would buy whitefish and carp out of a barrel. And he would bring it home and put it in the bathtub in water. And it would be there for 24 hours until my great-grandmother would go, and she'd turn it all into gefilte fish. And my great-grandfather, and there's profound lessons in this, he would be so excited about it, because truth is, my great-grandfather, he never really knew his actual birthday for whatever reason. So we always celebrate, he was from the old country, and we celebrated his birthday on the first Seder every year. He picked it. He says, well, we'll have my birthday on the first Seder. And that's what we would do every year. And he would be so excited, not only to take me for, I remember 4 or 5 years of this, little boy, to get the fish out of the barrels. He'd bring it home in these big bags. He'd put it in the bathtub with water. My grandfather would cut off their heads, turn it into gefilte fish. But the reason my great-grandfather would be so excited about it is that he really believed Pesach was he didn't care about the calendar of when spring would begin. For him, in his mind, spring began on Pesach. And when spring began on Pesach, it's when he would plant his tomato plants, and he would take the fish heads and bury them in the ground as fertilizer. And he couldn't wait. He'd stand there in the kitchen and say, cut the fish already, cut the fish already. We got to put the fish in the ground. I got to put the fish heads in the ground. The reason I tell you the story, you can tell it excites me. It's like so deep, is that for my great-grandfather, he was a very devoted traditional Jew, but he didn't become that till late in his life after he retired. And like Fiddler on the Roof, when he could, finally, he went to shul every day, and he studied every day, and he kept kashrut every day, and he upped the ante in his Jewishness. And I've always found it fascinating that when we get to Pesach, people are inclined who may have no real traditional inclinations. When it comes to Pesach, they up the ante of traditionalism, whether it's like they kasher their house when they don't do it any other time of the year. And I believe the reason we read the story of the Red Heifer right before Pesach is to teach us, like Ecclesiastes says, there's a time for this and a time for that. There's a time to be more open to the mystical. There's a time to be more open to the experience of God's miracles. There's a time to be open to spiritual possibilities. And when I explain to you the story of the Red Heifer, it is, I say, the most spiritual, non-rational, non-explained ritual probably in the Torah itself. And I think that's why we read it right now, to make us be a little less rational.
That's your right hand.
Just to be a little more open
Your
to the
right hand.
spiritual. So the Red Heifer. Well, first of all, I'll take a pause right there. I just got waxed all over the place.
He raised his hand. He has the same pattern.
What'd you say, Neil? Neil, did you say something? No. So before I talk about the Red Heifer per se, what do y'all think? Does this make sense? Does it sound familiar?
It sounds familiar about planting in the after Pesach. I've heard that before.
Hi, Donna.
Hi.
Welcome.
Stepping up traditionalism definitely sounds familiar as far as a few things you said.
Can't hear you, Neil.
Stepping up our tradition definitely sounds familiar from my upbringing. My dad would bring some carp home, and we wouldn't put it in the bathtub, but we had to deep sink in the basement. And it would stay there overnight or throughout the day. And then the following day, my mom would prepare it into gefilte fish. And yeah, the same thing. We would take, our finest china, and my mom would do a thorough cleaning of the house, and we'd have basically the only time of the year we'd have kosher would be
Mhm.
during Pesach.
The thing that-
my father retired, he stepped up his traditional,
Mhm.
would go to services every morning. 6 days a week, and
What's so interesting is that, particularly in American Jewish experience, how so many people are not meticulous about their Jewish ritual. But when Pesach comes around, they become much more meticulous.
Mhm.
And the red heifer is the story of meticulous. And here's what we learn. So in the time of the Bible, where there was limited scientific understanding, there was the science of the day, there was a great deal of fear and superstition related to death and dead things. Not only was, blood considered very frightening in and of itself, that's why meat was salted to take the blood out. And that was true of the sacrifices in the Bible as well. But this preoccupation with what happens if you come in contact with something that is dead. And there was, a lot of superstition and a lot of, we now know, misinformation about contamination and the like. And yet there was something forward thinking about it and recognizing that when we came in contact with dead things, that we needed to be careful and tentative. And so this ritual is introduced of the red heifer. And it was a ritual designed to purify someone who came in contact with the dead. And the ritual is quite unusual. And so they would ask for a volunteer from the community who would be willing to be the one to bring purity to the person who was defiled, and that was the term in the Torah, defiled by contact with the dead. And the ritual was described that a perfect red heifer, as I said, no gray, no white, no black hairs at all, would be inspected by the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and then it would be slaughtered. And then it would be sacrificed and burned up into a powder. And the powder would be taken and made into a concoction. And then the volunteer purifier would take this mixture and give it to the person, deliver it, and in a sense, feed the person defiled by contact with the dead. And by them consuming this, they would become purified. The great irony in all this meticulous ritual is that the person who volunteered and said, I'm willing to help, if they chose to carry out the ritual, the red heifer, bringing purification to someone over here, the result of them doing the ritual was they became defiled. So it required a volunteer who was willing to do a good deed and get defiled in the process. And then they'd have to go through another ritual to undefile the undefiler. You understand what I'm saying? A ritual to undefile the undefiler And when this is described in Leviticus, this is in such, honest to goodness, there's a lot of extreme detail in the Torah, but there's hardly a comparison to the detail related to this ritual. And in fact, Jewish tradition goes on and says it was barely maybe a handful of red heifers that have ever been fully identified in the whole history of the Jewish people. And, you know, those of you who like to read Jewish news may remember there was a suggestion that they found a red heifer in Texas some years back. And there was all this excitement. Oh my God, in the 20th century, we found a red heifer, no less in the United States of America. And then, as you might expect, Jewish authorities started to argue about it. Well, we're not sure it's really a red heifer. It might actually be a red heifer. I don't know. I looked at it. It has one white hair. Another one said, no, I looked at it. It has another black hair. And the end of it was they couldn't agree ultimately if it was a red heifer because of the meticulous nature of the ritual. So Shabbat Parah comes up this time of year, and it points us in the direction, really, I think, of the mystical of the mystical. Because just the whole concept that the goodwill of the person who steps forward and says, I will undefile the defiled and accept the fact that as a result, I'll become defiled, shows you how the preoccupation with defilement says something about the extent to which any individual is willing to go to aspire to something spiritual. And to me, that's very profound because all of us, it's not about how observant we are, how quote unquote religious we are, but we all have moments in life where we are aspiring to something very, very spiritual beyond the norm of our rational way of thinking. And I think just the fact that Judaism acknowledges this, the world, yes, there's a place for rationality. And we certainly know that in the world of extremism. But there's also a place for the mystical. And the way the story of Passover is where the mystical and the rational meet. And we'll talk more about that at our class next week. So this Shabbat Parah, think about the mystical and think about the things you do, the choices you make, where the world is saying rational and you have something in your heart or in your gut that says, no, 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 I need to go the mystical route. I find something there that isn't just a rational nature of things. One of the ways I describe our erring on the side of the mystical is with the word in Yiddish, beshert. Beshert, loosely translated, means destined. But it doesn't mean necessarily that God made it happen. And it doesn't mean necessarily that we made it happen, but it does indicate something more than we think made it happen. Something beyond what we can explain made it happen. And that's what I wanted to go up to tonight for Shabbat and open up the schmooze to share, everyone who's willing to share a beshert experience where the mystical clearly outweighed the rational. And if you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. And so I commend that to you on this Shabbat and say Shabbat Shalom. And what do you all think?
Well,
Yeah, unmute yourselves.
shalom, everyone.
Wow.
Do you remember any?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm just not sure where to start, I guess.
So who'd like to share a beshert?
I don't have a share it for you so much, Rabbi. I can tell you that on the subject of the red calf, that the sacrificial calf shall be without blemish. On all four sides of me, I have cattle ranches, and I'm very familiar with calving. And to say to find the calf without blemish, that's a pretty neat trick. I don't think that in my entire life I've ever seen one that was of a shade color or another shade color. And to be without blemish would make it probably a very special animal. That did catch my eye from the beginning in the story of the red calf. To be a calf without blemish is a pretty neat trick.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Well, I think it was a Bashir experience.
When, I mean, how you became involved with the temple, you know, in a lot of ways.
Kind of an
Um,
accident, but not an accident.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of connections came together around that.
Mm-hmm.
They were seemingly disconnected, but then all of a sudden we realized the connections. True.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I can't even remember now. I know you were helping with the Rosh Hashanah service. I think it was 2019. We had 3 rabbis at that service, you and 2 others. And I just remember we were out to lunch after, and you were so gracious and you were so generous, and you were offering your help if there's anything you can do to help the temple. And then this thing just fell out of my mouth. I just said, well, would you be our rabbi? I had not checked with the board. I had not, premeditated that. It just fell out of my mouth, and here we are.
All I did was chant a little Torah. That was it.
Right.
But it
Well,
was special.
That's a
We
bit.
felt like we found a home.
yeah,
Loretta and me felt like that.
yeah.
And then the connection with Rabbi Marcus was just
Yeah.
astounding, really. But others of you must have had experiences which you might call beshert.
Yeah,
Well,
I
with
know.
John and I keep saying all the time that the number 18 keeps coming up again and again and again. And it has so many times. By coincidence, he converted to Judaism on the 18th of March. And we had a get together in the house. It was supposed to be 22 people over, and it ended up a couple of people were out of town. So it was 18 people who came over, and just 18 keeps coming up. We got our cemetery plots, and it ended up to be, the plot was number 118.
118.
It just keeps happening again and again, so many times at the number 18. So I tell him it's Besheth, that it just is between us, that 18 again and again. So that's our Besheth.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
See, I love hearing stories like this. I could listen to this all day.
Yeah.
Where people feel this spiritual connection.
Oh, I have one. 'Cause
Okay.
I know you want to hear from me, I'm sure. But my brother lived with my mom and she was very sick. So he was an EMT, was God sent that he stayed with her. He had been divorced and he had a place there. So that was number 1. And then number 2, when my mother passed away, he wanted to go to be with his children in Hawaii. And he didn't know how to disconnect with everything. So he stayed with me But it turned out that somebody far, far away that he happened to know came and took over his job. So he didn't have to look for someone to replace him.
Oh,
People gave him money to move. We all pitched in and gave some money for him to take his car over. And he ended up being there. And his daughter said, "Look what I found. I found my father."
oh,
That's really
Very
neat.
cool.
Beautiful.
Hmm.
Thank you for that.
How do you define shift? Yeah. Boy,
yeah. I think they happen all the time. I mean,
Well, it's worth just sitting back on Shabbat and thinking about Beshert. And
Oh, I think just still having Temple Aaron being a synagogue and not some B&B or private residence or an office of some company or whatever. And just having everybody here signifies that. Now we have a sold out room for for Pesach for the Seder. So very meaningful.
I think part of the lesson in all this is that you don't even need the meticulous spiritual ritual of a red heifer to connect with the spiritual dimension of everything. You know, just have to be open to it.
Yeah. Just step into it.
You know, I have to tell you, I'm quite a rationalist. I studied philosophy, intellectual history. I pride myself as being a rational person, and I even went through a stage in my rabbinical life where I was bound and determined to disprove the spiritual, honestly.
How'd that go?
How did that go? You know, I'm glad I had a Torah class that I met with every week, as I've had often throughout my journey. And, you know, I say, God bless them, they suffered through it with me, because I really was committed to finding rational proofs of God. What you learn from Immanuel Kant is that all the rational proofs of God are really not proofs of God's existence at all. They're just proof of the idea of God. And there's a big difference between being able to articulate the idea of God's existence and actually experiencing something connected to God's experience, God's existence. And that's where the realm of Beshert comes in. And I exhausted actually all my rational attempts, actually not to disprove God, but to prove God. And in the end, I then had to face something in my personal life. And there was no rational exit. All I was left with was something spiritual and aspirational. And I saw the universe respond. And you find, and I'm not proposing, you know, God answers prayers literally. I don't know if that's true or not. But I do, as I've taught you before, I think the universe is inclined toward goodness. We just have to orient ourselves toward it. And then the spiritual becomes more obvious. And I think we all experience that at different times in our life. Any closing comments on tonight's theme?
I'm sorry I missed tonight's feed. Thank you for allowing me to join my great grandfather.
Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. My
Good to
great
see you.
grandfather, Simon Sanders, one of the founders. I've just recently reconnected with Temple Aaron I'm out in Washington State, and thank you.
Ah.
Wait, repeat that again, Rick. Your grandfather was,
My great grandfather was Simon Sanders, one of the founders.
wow, wonderful.
Wow.
Great. That is great.
I'm very happy and thrilled that it's still a going synagogue and things are moving forward. It's very, very nice to see all of you. Though I haven't met you, but it's we're all family, so I'm very thrilled that Temple Aaron's still going.
Rick,
Thank you.
I just want to jump in if you don't mind, guys, and say that, especially with Rick being here, we've had this kind of ongoing desire, but we just haven't fulfilled it and really haven't moved forward with it to find relatives, families of all those on the cornerstone of the temple, the Japhas,
Also, last name again?
Sanders.
Sanders. And so I don't know if you happen to know of anybody else who was part of that founding group of Temple Aaron, but we really invite you to stay involved and let us help build that, create that cornerstone into a living monument of descendants today.
Well, we wanted to put together some family history stuff. We've started gathering information and pictures and stories and that sort of thing. And actually, our former board member, David, volunteered to work on that and collect the stories. So I don't know if you'd be willing to talk to him.
I don't even know if you know what we're referring to, Rick, if you've seen that cornerstone or not.
Rick, I want to give you a spiritual, I want to offer you a very, very special spiritual response. When I heard that you told me who you are, I got goosebumps. And I want to share, Rick, a story with you especially. There's a story in the Talmud. There's an old person who's planting a vineyard. And the first thing that happens is a group of young people come by and they look at the old person and they say, "What are you doing, old person, planting this vineyard? You're not going to be around to see it give grapes." And the old person says, but someone planted a vineyard thinking of me, and I've enjoyed those grapes. And I need to plant a vineyard for those who come later. And then the story goes on and it says, and the person was just busy every day planting the vineyard, knowing full well the person would never see the grapes. And at that very moment, someone came down the street and said, Mashiach gekommen, Mashiach gekommen. The Messiah is here. The Messiah is here. And the rabbis in the Talmud asked the question, so what should the old person do? Drop everything and go rush to see the Messiah? And they answered, they said, no. They said, old person, we know the Messiah is coming. Keep planting. Keep planting.
What a great story.
And that's for you, because you're the generation and we're the beneficiaries of what your grandfather?
The great-grandfather.
Your great-grandfather did. And here we are, we're living in the vineyard that he helped plant. And we're now enjoying the fruits of that vineyard. Thank you so much for sharing. It's
Well,
just
thank you so much.
beautiful to me.
Thank you so much for keeping Temple Air going. I apologize. I was trying to get back in time. I'm in Washington State, so
Yeah,
there's a bit of time difference trying to get back in time. But thank you so much for keeping the flame burning out there. And we're going to make a pilgrimage out there sometime to visit. I was
Oh,
there when I
good.
was 5 years old, but I don't remember it. It's too long ago.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
feel free to join us for our Torah study or Shabbat,
Oh, yeah.
whatever.
Thank you. I will.
You add, this is like, it's a cliche, but you add years to our life. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And Shabbat Shalom to everybody. And thank you for keeping the flame going. That's so important.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining today.
Thank
Please
you.
Go through the website and become familiar with it. I think-
I'm sorry. Hard to.
Go through our website, Temple Aaron website,
Yes.
and get familiar with it. And I think you'll.
I was actually in contact with Mrs. Rubin when she was around.
Oh,
Years ago.
uh-huh.
Okay.
And we had talked, and I had a relative that was still out there who was alive, that was part of the Sanders clan, that was still,
Mhm.
and I connected with him for a little bit before he passed. But yeah, it's something that, our family out here constantly talk about in trying to get back out there, because we're all from that branch of the tree, so to speak. And it warms my heart every time I look on the website, and I do stay up on the emails and keep up,
Oh,
and I
okay.
will be more active. But it's just a very warming feeling to see, people like yourselves in the community. It was on the brink. I know it was on the brink for a while, but to bring it back from the brink and make it what it is, and God bless you for that. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
again,
God
your
bless you.
great grandfather was Simon Sanders.
Hmm?
Your great grandfather was Simon Sanders.
Yeah, Simon Sanders, Simon and Jenny.
Oh, Jenny, because on the cornerstone in the trustees, there's an S Sanders, and there's also a J Sanders.
I'm sorry, it's very hard to hear you. I'm sorry.
There was an S. there was-
Go ahead.
there
On the
was-
cornerstone,
on the cornerstone of the building,
Mhm.
it's listed as S. Sanders and J. Sanders.
Yeah, that's Simon and Jenny.
Jenny.
Wife.
Wow. Beautiful.
oh, really? They were both, okay.
She was a Levy from the tribe
Yes.
of Levy. And
Levy, Gottlieb, a Sugarman.
Yep.
There we go.
There's a
So
photo.
Jenny
there
was
it
in
is. Michael. Thank you, Michael.
yeah. And then he had,
It's a J Sanders and an S Sanders.
Yeah.
I believe your great grandfather was the treasurer. And
Yeah, I
then
think
there is a
he
J
donated-
Sanders under the trustees.
yeah,
Were they
read-
related?
donated the land for the shul. And
Wow.
and then
Cool.
he had another Simon Sanders was his son, and Isidore and Leopold were his sons.
Love it. It's
Wow.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's my grandmother's name was Emily Sanders. It was the daughter of, and then her father was obviously, but yeah, I did a whole lot of research and never, I'm thrilled to death to be joining you, and I hope I'm not holding everyone up. And
Not
I
at all.
apologize for being late, but I'm
Not
so
at all. Not at
so
all.
thrilled to participate and see what's going on there, and we're looking forward to getting out there sometime for a visit.
Wonderful.
That'd be
Wonderful.
great.
And
I
we'll
have
be
a
seeing.
mundane question. What's happening with the heating system?
Hey, such a Shabbos discussion,
It's happening, Sean. It's happening.
It's happening. I hope next week
He's in
they're
charge.
gonna have a crew to bring it in. It was going to happen a week ago Thursday, but there was a big snowstorm down there, and it just put the kibosh. It canceled it. So presumably, he told me last week that it would be the week after this. So next week, hopefully, they'll have the guys together to carry it in. And once the actual boiler is down in the basement of the cellar, then only then will they be able to start, assembling it, hooking up all the piping, doing all the adjustments, insulating. But so it's around the corner. It hasn't happened yet, but it's in process. Thanks for asking.
All right, everyone, we're going to bring this to a close for this Shabbat. I'm going to bring up now the mourners Kaddish for all to see. And let's just take a moment and pause and understand that Judaism teaches that memory is the key to redemption. And the Kaddish prayer does not mention death. It speaks of eternal life and how we as humans bring God's presence into the world. If we think about the people we'd like to remember, if we say the Kaddish, think about the ways, in their own ways, they brought God's presence into the world too. So I'd like to invite anyone who'd like to share the name of someone you'd like to remember during Kaddish. You'd share that with us.
I would like to share my mother. She just passed away 3 weeks ago.
So sorry.
Emily Sanders, Judith. And so I'm saying Kaddish for her.
Zichronah Livracha, may her memory forever be a blessing.
This is my mother's yard site. Linda Medina.
Zichronah Livracha, may her memory be a blessing.
Amen.
Madeline Albright.
Oh, yeah.
Zichronah Livracha, may her memory be a blessing. Anyone else?
Both my parents and my brother.
Zichronam Livracha, may
Emil
their
and David.
memories be a blessing. We join together. Yitkadal, V'yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Yalma, Divra Cherute, V'yamlich Malchute, V'chayechon, Uv'yomechon, Uv'chayedechol Beit Yisrael, V'agola, V'zman Kariv, V'yimru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevorach, Le'olam Le'omei Omaya, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yit Hadar, V'yit Aleh, V'yit Halal, Shemei Dekudsha, Leila Min Kol Birchata V'shirata, Tushbechata V'nechemata, Da'amiran B'yalma V'yimru, Amen. Yehi Shlomo Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael V'yimru, Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'yimru.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Always
Shabbat.
wonderful to be together.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
It's great to see you, Rick.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so the tour study is next Saturday, then April 2nd.
April 2nd at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thank you.
usually these have 2 weeks between, but we rescheduled this one. So
Okay.
I'm glad
Yeah.
you did. I would have missed it last week.
hi
Yeah.
Nancy.
Hi there. I was in the
Hi,
balcony.
Nancy. So sei gesund, everybody.
Is it good?
Thank you.
Good.
Shabbat shalom.